All right, gentlemen, so now we begin 9.5, how a bill becomes a law. We will finally work our way through the um, confusing and complex process that is this flow chart. Do not be intimidated. It looks like a lot. It is, but it's also repetitive in that much of what is happening in the House will happen in the Senate and vice versa. Um, so it's there are some differences. There are some aspects of each we'll have to cover individually, but in general, it is repetitious to some extent, which helps simplify some things. So, step one, we have to actually propose legislation. We have to introduce a bill. Um, Before we get started, hopefully by the end of this lecture, I will say this really quickly. I hope that you will understand or better appreciate now why Congress is not known for breaking any speed records. Once you get done going through this process, I think you'll see there are 100 ways to stop a bill, and there's only one path to success for a bill, really. So it becomes opponents of legislation have a lot more weapons at their disposal than supporters of a bill, which is going to help explain to some extent why Congress is not known for, again, just dropping legislation left and right with the greatest of ease. Now, how do we introduce a bill? Any member of Congress may introduce a bill. Any member. Um, One thing, too, about it, it has to get done in that session. Okay? So if a bill has not, it is introduced, but it has not completed the legislative process in one legislative session, then it's done. It dies. It expires. It's not like it can pick back up where it left off. It has to start all over again. Okay, so there is a bit of a shot clock. Now, how does a bill get introduced? Well, in the House, you can either hand it to a clerk who will take it up front and submit it, or you can drop it in a box. They have a drop box. It's actually called the hopper. Yes, there it is, the congressional hopper. Okay, there's the fancy podium that they have at the front of the House of Representatives, and no kidding, if you would like to propose a law, you drop it in this little box right here. Um, it looks like something I cobbled together in my workshop in my garage. But there is where some of the most important legislation in American history is born. Um, so as a member of the House, you can either actually hand it off to a clerk to run up there, or you can go drop it in the hopper yourself. Um, in the United States Senate, it is a little more formal in the sense of you are recognized by the presiding officer, who, as we said, could be the vice president, could be the president pro tempore, could be the substitute for the president pro tempore. Regardless, whoever's up there and running the show that day, they will call on you. You will stand up and you will announce the introduction of the bill. The bill is then numbered and printed, and it starts its life cycle. Now, you have probably heard about presidents pushing legislation, supporting legislation, backing it, sponsoring it. For example, the Affordable Care Act has been called Obamacare because obviously it was one of his principal items. Presidents cannot actually introduce legislation. It has to be introduced by a legislator. A member of Congress must do it. So the president can write a bill. Quite honestly, they could write the whole thing. Then they can hand it off to a congressman to then introduce. Now, presidents don't do this willy-nilly. Presidents are going to usually, they're going to get some feelers out there. They're going to talk to some principal people. They'll probably talk to the most powerful members of their party in Congress. Presidents are not going to willy-nilly throw things out there for the legislature if it doesn't have a good shot, because even though the president's name isn't going to actually be on it officially in the congressional record, everyone's going to know it's the president's bill. And so if it gets defeated, it's egg on the president's face. Now, in addition to bills, Congress also does a few other things. They pass resolutions. Either house can pass what is called a simple resolution. A simple resolution is usually something that is for the House. Housekeeping matters, rule matters within their own institution. Simple resolutions are usually the kind of thing that doesn't affect you or I. We oftentimes don't hear about them. A concurrent resolution is a resolution, which will affect both houses and is sometimes used to rectify inconsistencies between the two or to simplify processes between the two, whatever, but concurrently, so it affects both of them. And then there's a joint resolution. A joint resolution actually requires the approval of the majority of both houses, and it requires the president's signature. A joint resolution is basically like a law, only it's not a law. It has the force of law, but it is not, in fact, a law. Simple and concurrent resolutions are not signed by the president. Simple and concurrent resolutions are not law, per se. But a joint resolution is like a law. It has all the characteristics of a law, except for it does not have the process background prior to its approval. But I do want to point out, interestingly enough, a joint resolution would be the method used if Congress were to propose a constitutional amendment. So if you were to have a constitutional amendment proposed by the Congress instead of out of the state legislatures, because remember there are two possible ways to propose constitutional amendments, it would be in the form of a joint resolution, but it would not have the signature of the president, and it would, instead of having a majority vote, be a two-thirds vote. But there's a little caveat there. So, all right. Let's get the party started. You didn't hand it off. You got out of your comfy chair. You walked down there to the illustrious hopper, and you dropped your bill in the hopper, and it has started the process. The first step in the process, and I'll kind of keep bouncing back and forth to this diagram. All right, it's been introduced. All right. First thing, it's got to go to a committee. Now, deciding which committee a bill goes to is done by the Speaker, if it's in the House, or by the Senate's presiding officer, as you can see up there. So basically, the person in charge of the House or in charge of the Senate decides into which committee a bill will go for further consideration and work. If the chairperson of a committee, or if the committee as a whole is known to be hostile to a bill, boy, that pretty much guarantees it's going to be killed right then and there. Now, there are rules that determine which committees a bill may get submitted to. There are some committees to which you can send a bill, but there are some times where you have some flexibility, right? I mean, there are rules. You know, the Speaker cannot just willy-nilly be like, oh, I'm going to send it over there because I feel like it. You know, if it's a matter involving law, like the legal system, like let's say something involving the FBI, in the House, it's going to go to the Judiciary Committee. There's a House Judiciary Committee. More than likely. I don't know all the rules, but, you know, it would make no sense for you to take that and send it to Agriculture. But there are ones where there's a little flexibility. For example, you have a bill that's going to involve veterans benefits. It's going to involve VA hospitals, but it does involve something to do with current military members as well, and like their compensation and medical care. Let's say something like that. Yes, it's primarily a Veterans Affair, and there's a Veterans Affair Committee in both the Senate and the House. But guess what? There's also an Armed Services Committee in both the House and the Senate. And if we're talking about something that involves veterans but also current active duty members, who's to say which one's going to get it? So that's an example of where there is some flexibility, there is some freedom of choice there potentially, and it comes back to, you know, thinking about who's gonna give this a fighting chance, who's going to kill it instantly, and who might be in support of it. You look at the committee makeup, you look at the chairman of the committee and their opinion of it, their attitude of it. And so that's an important, you know, the speaker's ability to decide to what committee bills get assigned is honestly one of the greatest strengths of the Speaker of the House currently. Because again, that can break a bill. I'm not going to say that can make a bill, but that can break a bill. I mean, in the cradle, right? You could have it killed in committee almost instantly at using that ability or that power. I do want to point out that there are some things that don't have flexibility. The Constitution clearly states that all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives. The Senate can and always does amend such bills, but the House starts them. Okay, so tax bills, okay, revenue bills, that's tax bill, okay, tax law. So anything involving taxes must start in the House of Representatives. Now, bills that are not for raising revenue, so non-tax law can start anywhere, but revenue bills must start in the House, okay? The House also, by tradition, not by law, but by tradition, originates all appropriations or spending bills. Again, that's not a law, but that is by tradition, which means since spending and revenue bills tend to originate in the House Ways and Means Committee, which is basically the House committee that's primarily responsible for revenue and spending decisions, is an incredibly important and sought-after committee appointment within the House of Representatives. Now, committee. We have talked about committees a little bit. Actually, we talked about them a good deal in the last one. Most bills die in committee. Most bills will never get beyond committee. Most bills will never see the floor of the United States House, the United States Senate. They will never be debated. They will be proposed, they will go to committee, and they will die somewhere in the maze, the labyrinth that is committee work. Okay? Now, you know, and honestly, many bills are introduced by members of Congress fully aware that they will not pass, that they have no hope. But they are proposed because it's the whole "I'm going to say that I tried" idea. You know, we touched upon this when we talked about the success of incumbents getting reelected. You know, one of their great weapons or tools, they can say, you know, I did this, I did that, or I tried. And the failure for something to pass, they can pin that on someone else, right? It's not them. They made an effort. So a lot of stuff gets thrown out there, and it's never going to see the light of day, but it allows members of the Congress to tell their constituents or interest groups, you know, I did my best. Bills of general interest are assigned to a subcommittee hearing, right? Where that is where you're going to have your testimony. That's where you're going to have experts, you're going to have data, you're going to have presentations. Questions will be asked by the various members of the subcommittee. You know, this is a chance for congressmen to get better informed. These are the hearings that are to inform members of Congress and also allow parties that might be parties of interest to a bill to speak, either for or against. If you are ever you ever find yourself on YouTube, you know, finding some video of some member of Congress, you know, getting owned, so to speak, or some member of Congress going off on someone, 9 times out of 10, it is a video of a subcommittee hearing. I saw one. I saw one where Representative Cortez, she got into an altercation, a verbal argument with a former head of Homeland Security or ICE, former head of ICE, sorry. And they kind of went round and round over the semantics about illegal immigrants, and it was humorous. I've also seen one where it's a I can't remember which committee, but it's one to do with like the military, and they were talking about procuring weapons and weapons platforms and blah blah blah, and at one point a general in the Air Force was like, oh yeah, we're all good, we'll use the B-1 bomber to do this, and John McCain goes off about don't tell me that a B-1 is equal to an A-10, or it's stuff like that. I'm sorry for going on that tangent, but some of you have probably seen some of those videos, or some senator who's known for going off. They're doing it in a subcommittee hearing. They're not doing that on the floor of the United States Senate or the United States House. It's in those committee hearings. I've seen Adam Carolla testify, the comedian Adam Carolla. I can't remember what it was, but he was testifying at some subcommittee hearing about PC culture and how he doesn't do things on college campuses anymore. I've seen all sorts of interesting stuff come out of subcommittee hearings. But like I said, they're designed to be informative. They are designed to where it's question and answer and presentations are made, etc. Committee hearings are valuable, but they also are one of the problems in a way, because again, the members of the committee have all this information. It's not to say that they keep it secret, but all these congressmen are in all these different committees. As we said, senators are in multiple subcommittees and multiple major committees and minor committees, and you don't have time to read every single report that's made in Congress, and so you have a handful of members of Congress who really know what's going on, and if you're lucky, other people are getting the cliff notes or the spark notes. Otherwise, most people are in the dark. And it leads to kind of a fragmented view or a fractured view, a misunderstanding. Your book mentioned it makes it hard to pass complex legislation because it's complex and there's a lot of wrinkles and rubs and details, and a lot of people are misinformed, and it's hard to get the right information out there. George W. Bush, he tried to expand government support for religious groups that provided social services and all. After 3 years of wrangling with Congress, he didn't get a single one of those laws passed. Not that, I'm not going to say, oh, it's the Democrats. It's hard to get people to understand what's involved. Now, having a strong personality in the White House might help some, but it doesn't guarantee anything. A strong White House and strong public opinion is what can help pass controversial measures through with minimal delay. You've got to have strong public opinion to put pressure on the legislators, but you also need, generally speaking, a stronger presidential presence to help kind of get things moving along as well. But back to the matter of committees and subcommittee hearings. After these hearings, the committee or subcommittee will make changes. They will make additions and revisions to the bill. These are not official. They are basically recommendations. In order for these recommendations to actually become part of the new bill, they must be approved by the House. Now, let's just go ahead and say the House approves the modifications as proposed. If a majority of the committee votes to report a bill favorably, it goes forward, accompanied basically with their endorsement. And committee members who oppose the bill, if there are any, they can add on their little statement. So basically, the bill moves forward with kind of a score, so to speak, a grade, a review. If the committee does not report favorably, that usually kills it, right? If the people on the committee, the experts on the committee, the people who know all there is to know, theoretically, about the topic, don't like the bill really doesn't have a prayer. Going back again, the average congressman goes into that room, they don't really know what the heck they're about to vote on. So they ask a colleague. They will ask a trusted colleague, a mentor, or good odds are they're going to ask a member of the committee. And, hey, what do you think? And if the members of the committee don't like it, they're going to tell most of the people they talk to don't vote for it, and that's going to kill it. Now, there are ways for... There's a way where the House can actually get a bill that has been stalled in committee. That's another tactic. Let's say it's a bill in committee There are a lot of, the majority of the committee wants the bill to get out, or the committee's divided. Let's just put it that way. Or we just can't seem to come up with a good answer that makes everybody on the committee happy. And it's just sitting there, and it's sitting there, and it's sitting there. There is a thing called a discharge petition. If 218 members of the House sign it, you can basically force the bill, as it currently is, to come out onto the floor for a vote. Right then and there. You can basically just tell the committee, you're done, you've had too long to play with it, it's our turn. Discharge petitions are very rare, and they rarely, if ever, work. Think about it. If the committee is that divided on it, what are the odds that the Congress at large is not going to be that divided on it? Also, what are the odds you're going to get 218 congressmen to jump on that, right? Oh, yeah, let's bring out this half-baked idea. Let's bring this bill that has not gone through the proper modification process, let's call it. Let's just go ahead and throw that one out there for a vote. Most congressmen aren't going to stick their neck out for that one. So discharge petitions are rare. Now, for a bill to actually get out on the floor, though, for us to start really debating it and get ready to vote on it, it first has to get on the calendar. There are 5 calendars in the House and 2 in the Senate. A bill goes on the calendar, but it's not necessarily in chronological order. This is not the deli. You don't take a number. Your position on the calendar can vary. In the House as well, the Rules Committee, a very powerful branch of party leadership, is it basically is like the Speaker of the House's little gang. The Rules Committee kind of helps and enforces for the Speaker in a way. The Rules Committee reviews the bills and sets about the procedures by which the bills will be debated and if they can be amended. Okay, 3 types of rulings. Restrictive rules. Restrictive rules, the Rules Committee says that certain kinds of amendments can be made to the bill when it's being debated on the floor. So a restrictive rule sets restrictions. It doesn't completely deny you the ability to amend a bill, but it sets clear-cut limits on what amendments can be put on a bill. Closed rule says that there is a strict limit on debate. It tells you how long we can argue this thing, and it forbids a bill from being amended on the floor of the United States House. Excuse me. So restrictive rule allows for some amendments and doesn't put an actual limit on debate, but that obviously is at the discretion of the Speaker. A closed rule sets an actual limit on debate. There's a real time limit or a date to end debate, however you want to term it, and there are no amendments allowed. We're going to go with this bill the way it is, right? Win or lose. An open rule, as you would assume, means you can have amendments. There are no limits on debate necessarily, etc. The Rules Committee, once very powerful, not as powerful as it once was. It's still a powerhouse, but it's not what it was back in the day. Like we keep saying, back in the Gilded Age and things like that. The Rules Committee a little more powerful. I will say in the 1980s, closed rules became more common than they once were, in part because basically you had a lot of wheeling and dealing and horse trading when it wasn't closed. And you had endless amendments and endless arguments and pork and tack-ons, and it's gotten to where they've realized you just got to go with the bill. Just go with what the committee made and see what happens. And that's why the Rules Committee is important. The Rules Committee is like a traffic cop, and that's the metaphor your book gave. You need somebody to say which things we're going to go with just the way they are, and which things, okay, we'll allow some debate, we'll allow some discussion, we'll allow some argument, which things need to just get moving, and which things we will leave the door open to a little more discussion, etc. You can bypass the Rules Committee, but I highly, strongly recommend you don't do so because you do so at your own peril. If members of the House of Representatives want to make the move and go through the process to bypass the Rules Committee, you do so at your own peril. First of all, you're obviously going to gain the dislike of members of the Rules Committee, and they won't forget that anytime soon. Secondly, it kind of goes against tradition and precedent, right? It's kind of breaking the chain of command. It's not a good look. On the Senate, it's the Senate, right? There's no limits. There's no rules. Bills, they're just, the calendar's pretty loosey-goose, as we'll talk about here in a minute. Basically, the majority leader and the minority leader get together, and they're like, what do you want to talk about this week? It's a little more low-key, but again, it's a smaller organization. It's a little more, I keep saying it's informal. It's informal in its formality. Okay, let me explain that. The theory is no one gets to the Senate their first go, right? I know somebody's going to look up an example, but generally speaking, Senate is not your first gig. You've been around the block. You've earned your stripes. You know how the game is played. You're a little bit of an older crowd, a little bit more of a seasoned crowd, and you guys understand how this game is played, and you don't need all the rules and all the regulations and all the red tape because you guys know how to handle yourselves, right? I mean, there's that kind of sentiment. So they are more informal in the way they handle things because they are older and more seasoned, etc., right? So there's a little more formality in being a senator, and therefore they operate a little more low-key with each other. Now, let's talk about floor debate. Oh, finally, sir. Because everybody imagines that it's a room. The entire Congress is assembled, and it's like Henry Clay, right, and Dan Webster, and John C. Calhoun, right, that the American triumvirate are there thundering away at each other. Truth be told, that rarely happens. The one rule in the House is you have to have what they term the committee of the whole. Basically, whenever, as long as there are 100 members present, bills can be discussed. That basically, if we don't have 100 congressmen in the room, 100 representatives in the room, we are not allowed to have debate over a bill. It's considered not enough. We don't have a committee of the whole. The committee of the whole can debate. They can amend. They can basically shape a bill, but they cannot pass it. They can't really vote on it. That must be done by a quorum. You have to have half, actually, a little over half of the House of Representatives present. You have to have 218 representatives in the room to have a legitimate vote. The theory being, we're not going to have a vote with at least half the House of Representatives in the room. Procedures, again, in the Senate, a lot more casual. Measures passed by the House get thrown on the Senate calendar without even having a committee hearing. Generally, the Senate's like, yeah, the House already did a bunch of work on it, so let's talk about it. We're not going to do our own investigating. We're good. We have enough investigating. There's no committee of the whole. There's no like X number of senators have to be in the room. If Senator McConnell wants to sit there and talk to two other senators about how he feels on the topic, feel free. There's no limit on debate, which of course allows for the ever so fun filibuster, where you try and prevent a vote from being taken by just talking and talking and talking. There's also a fun thing called riders. Riders are the term that we give for irrelevant amendments. Basically, senators are allowed to try and tack things onto a bill. The name comes from the idea that they will ride along, that they will ride the coattails of the big bill, and they'll become a law that way. That they're the kind of thing that on their own would not make it, but you got to tack it on to something important, and it'll get through. And so that's why we call them riders. Speaking of riders, this is where you will get some of those, and we're going to get to it again here shortly. I'll talk about it here in a moment, but you've probably seen the campaign ads where it's Representative so and so voted for this or voted against this. I'll just go ahead and he voted against body armor for the troops in Iraq, and it's like, what? A rider could have done that, right? I mean, that's somebody tacked something onto a big bill, and this guy, and again, we'll talk more about it here in a moment. But it's going to be a situation where, there are 34 things on that thing that you need, that you believe in, that you support, and then somebody tacked one thing on the very end, damned rider. And you're like, yeah, well, I'll just bite my lip and vote for that because, what am I going to do? Shoot down these 34 things that I really believe in so I can prevent the one thing I don't like in there? And so the Senate is where you'll get things like that. Riders are basically additions to a bill or amendments to a bill that senators want to throw on there. It's not something they have in the House, but it is something they have in the Senate. Speaking of filibusters can be broken if 3/5 of the senators vote a vote of cloture. Okay, you need 60 senators to vote a vote of cloture to end a filibuster. This is rarely occurs, and I do want to point out, as I think I've mentioned previously, the filibuster is not going anywhere. As much as some people think the filibuster is childish, as some people complain about the filibuster being a roadblock to success in the Senate, both sides have used the filibuster over the decades. Republicans, Democrats, liberals, and conservatives, and everyone in between has used the filibuster at some point. And that's why they won't give it up. Because every time the filibuster bites them, and they get mad about it, I think in the back of their mind they remember, one day I'll get to filibuster something, right? One day I'll get to stick it back at them. And nobody wants to give that up. It's not the best of metaphors. It's the nuclear option, politically in the United States Senate, right? It is the point of no return in some ways. When you kind of go on the filibuster, you're drawing a line in the sand. There's no going back. But everyone wants to have that weapon in their back pocket in times of desperation, right? It's the last stand. And so it's not going anywhere. Now, some of you might think, well, the filibuster prevents anything from happening, and filibusters have become more common. But thanks to a thing we call double tracking, it's not a problem. When a senator filibusters against a bill, they just declare they're filibustering. We are no longer going to do like we did back in the day. Back when they filibustered the 1964 Civil Rights Act, right? And you had guys up there for days. I mean, quite literally days. Talking about whatever they wanted to, reading their mom's cookbook, whatever. Just literally refusing to step away from the microphone so they could prevent the voting of a law. That shuts down the whole Senate, right? Not just that bill. Double tracking is a way where we go, okay, this has been filibustered, and we're going to put it on the shelf. And we're going to put it on the shelf, labeled things that are being filibustered. And we'll go on with other business. It's like the whole two-calendar thing, basically. There are two calendars in the United States Senate for a reason. There's the A calendar, and if something on the A calendar gets filibustered, we'll jump over to the B calendar, and we'll go with the B calendar until somebody filibusters something on there, in which case we'll jump back to the A calendar, and so on and so forth. Double tracking allows us to kind of keep moving along. It basically, by the way, the filibuster and the fact that double tracking has stopped the Senate, because it used to be the filibuster was really a super effective weapon because it did shut down the Senate. So it truly was the nuclear option. Now we've made it to where you can just throw your temper tantrum and business will continue. And so people throw more temper tantrums because it doesn't shut down the government. The filibuster has become so common that basically no controversial bill will pass the Senate unless it has 60 votes of support, because you need to basically assure the filibuster will be broken if you want a controversial bill to get anywhere. Now, the Senate has made efforts in the past to end the filibuster when it came to federal judges. Now, they are not abolishing the concept of the filibuster when it comes to federal judges, but in 2005, 14 senators, 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats, took a pledge where they refused to filibuster nominations for the federal judgeship except in exceptional circumstances. They basically made it mathematically impossible to have a filibuster involving a federal judge. Because, again, if I have 14 senators who refuse to partake in a filibuster, right, and in order to have a filibuster, I have to have 41 senators who are willing to join the filibuster to prevent the vote of cloture, right? Because if I have 60, I have a vote of cloture. So I need to have 41 senators who agree to filibuster. If you have 14 who just said that they're not going to filibuster, you have basically a smaller pool of people with which to build your super duper majority to conduct a filibuster. Not super majority, but to get those 40, 41 actually you need. So they made it practically impossible to have a filibuster. It lasted for a few years, and it actually managed to get a few judge nominees that had been tied up, basically because of a refusal to cooperate. And it got them appointed. It worked. And then in 2013, the Democrats under Majority Leader Harry Reid, they used a little parliamentary trick to block the filibuster of nominations, except for the Supreme Court. And so they did actually remove the filibuster for federal judges at that time. Again, with the exception of the Supreme Court and certain other special offices. Nominations can move on with a simple majority vote rather than needing 60 votes. Now, is this going to stay the way we keep operating for the future? Are we going to go back to the old way? I don't know. For those of you who are wondering, this has been called the nuclear option by many folks because it was a dramatic move. You took it from 60 to 51. For those of you who are curious, this is how you got Brett Kavanaugh. Had the old rule remained, Brett Kavanaugh would not be on the Supreme Court. And it's people have pointed out, it's ironic because it was the Democrats who brought about this so-called nuclear option. It's the Democrats who took it from 60 down to a simple majority, and it opened the door for a couple of Republicans to get on the Supreme Court. So, you know, again, I'm not sure what's going to happen with it, but we will see. One last thing I want to mention about the debate and discussion and how things are conducted in both the House and the Senate before we move on to them actually voting is courtesy. It is the United States Congress, and it is required that you have a certain level of decorum. You are to refer to each other as, you know, distinguished and esteemed, and, you know, if you've ever actually heard them speak in the Senate or the House, you know, the honorable gentleman, you know, the honorable lady, you know, the respect. You're supposed to use these titles, even if you despise them, right? It's the idea of you are in this elite organization, and they are deserving of your respect. Personal, you know, attacks or criticism is frowned upon, but it has become more common. In recent years, personal criticisms, like on the floor, have become more common, which is sad. There's a rule: you're not supposed to swear in the House and the Senate. If you do, you'll get fined. You know, there is a code of conduct, etc. And so it is somewhat sad to see that start to degrade over the years, and kind of take the chamber down from that very honorable professional level, in my opinion. We still have a ways to go, though. If you would like to see some of the less disciplined legislative bodies, all you need to do is look at some of these like European parliaments. There are fistfights in some of them because, I mean, people make personal attacks, people snap. Not to go that extreme, though. When I was in college, I took a European government course, and as part of the course one day, we watched the Prime Minister's Question Hour. Our professor recorded it and played it for us. Basically, at the end of the week, the Prime Minister, for an hour, takes questions from members of Parliament on anything, and it was weird to watch. But what was really weird was the quick give and take, and also that they made fun of each other. They told jokes. They were sarcastic. There were some barbs and jabs thrown out there, and the kind of thing that wouldn't occur on the floor of the House or the Senate. It wasn't as far as mom jokes, but it was, it was the kind of stuff that we would not expect, our Speaker of the House or Mitch McConnell or somebody to say about a fellow congressman. But on the floor of Parliament, I mean, that's the way they roll. And I mean, they were some good comebacks. I mean, I'll give them credit, but it's a little more of a realistic, like just regular person dialogue. But on the same token, you would hope that members of government would be above that in their interaction. And people have just noticed that our Congress is drifting the way of less formality, and that is a little unfortunate. And it probably is a result of they have the worst personal relationships. Going back to what I said the last lecture, their staffs are doing more and more of the work. They don't actually interact like they used to. They're not all eating lunch together. They're not all hanging out as much as they used to. They've got all sorts of people doing their work for them, and there's less interaction, and there's less personal relationship, and less camaraderie. But anyhow, moving on to, so here, really quickly. All right, so we introduced it. We sent it to committee. We sent it to a subcommittee. I testified at the subcommittee. I impressed the committee. The committee, the subcommittee reported to the committee, and the committee sent it to the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee said it's a closed action, a closed rule. They said it's a perfect bill. There's no need to have any amendments. They went to the floor. They've debated it, and Nancy Pelosi said, doggone it, it's time to vote. Let's do this. Okay, let's just go with that hypothetical. All right, it's time to vote. How do we vote? Okay. Well, in the House, there are 3 ways to vote. There is the voice vote. A voice vote, hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself. I apologize. This is where I wanted to touch upon something really quickly. And I touched upon it previously when I talked about riders. If you want to really know how a member of Congress feels on something, don't look at how they voted on bills, the final form of a bill. Look at how they voted on amendments to a bill. Because again, a bill might include 3 dozen provisions. There might be 36 separate nuggets in there. And political opponents and special interest groups and, websites like the NRA or whatever are going to give this person a rating based on how they voted on the final product, without taking into account that the person might have fought tooth and nail to prevent those amendments or those riders or whatever. They might have voted against it 3 times, and it ended up on the final bill despite their best effort. And meanwhile, the bill had a bunch of stuff in it that they had fought for and they support, So that is, again, why, members of Congress will vote for the final form of a bill that has amendments on it that they might not have wanted or they might not have liked. It's not the bill they originally wanted. But it's the bill they got, so they got to go with, the devil that they know. So knowing how they voted on the amendments is oftentimes a better signal of how they feel on something. I mentioned Mitch McConnell, or I didn't mention Mitch McConnell. We went to that NRA website where they rated how congressmen have voted on gun legislation, or being pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment, whatever, or pro-regulation. And out of curiosity, I clicked on Mitch McConnell, and I saw, Mitch has got 100% rating from the NRA. And I was like, wow. And then I clicked on his vote history, okay? And actually, we can do this really quickly. We have a moment. NRA. Congress ratings. Let's see what happens. This could go. I don't want that. I just want all. Here we go. So, Kentucky U.S. Senate, Mitch McConnell. Okay, here we go. I'm going to give you a great example here. Now, I'm not going to be able to show you his vote on the amendments, but here. Okay, so go to his votes. All right, select the issue. Okay, guns. I skipped it because I know the alphabet. Okay, guns. All right. So he was for whatever this is. and he prohibited the transfer of firearms to suspected terrorists. That doesn't sound very pro-gun, Mr. McConnell. Terrorists are people too. But so he voted no on that one. He voted yes on delaying the transfer of firearms to terrorists. Preserving the Second Amendment, defend our capital. And you start looking at some of those, and you're like, wait, what? What does this have to do with? Here you go, the D.C. Voting Act. This is the one that I was like, what? Okay, the D.C. Voting Act. The bill passed. He voted against it. Okay, what's the D.C. Voting Act? Okay, the D.C. Voting Act was a vote to pass a bill that would give the District of Columbia representation in the House of Representatives. Okay, so D.C. would get representatives. And I'm like, why does this have anything to do with how Mitch McConnell feels about guns? And then you start looking at it, and it prohibits, what was it? Oh, repeals the District of Columbia's ban on semi-auto. It's like, what? And so, yeah, a law that was originally written to get, it's even called, the D.C. Voting Act, okay? It was a bill to give them the right to have representation in Congress, and then you look and it's got clauses that involve guns and semi-automatic firearms and ammunition and stuff. So that's what I'm saying. Okay? Sorry, this was a long way to get there. But you can't just look at how a person voted on a bill necessarily. You got to look at the amendments. You got to look at how the bill got in its final form, how they felt and voted and treated it, all through that process. And even there, you've got to look a little deeper. D.C. Voting Rights Act, he voted against giving D.C. representation in Congress. And it's like, okay. And then I just showed you, had a bunch of other stuff in there. Bunch of other stuff. Had nothing to do with the House of Representatives, right? But, so, the more you know. The House. How do they vote in the House? There's three types of voting. There's a voice vote. What's a voice vote? You say yay or nay. Actually, it's aye or no. You just, all in favor? Aye. All against? Or whatever? Nay. Basically, a voice vote is like the laziest voting method in the history of the world. But you only use it on the ones where it's like a bang dead, no question. They're not going to do it on a super controversial one, right? They're not gonna do a voice vote on like articles of impeachment, right? They're gonna make sure they take an accurate count on something important. But if they know it's a bang dead, there's no questions asked. Maybe it's some mundane thing nobody really cares about. Fun one, maybe it's they don't necessarily want to be counted. That's another reason why you might do a division vote. So a voice vote is where they literally just say their yay or nay, and they go off basically the general, like which one sounded louder. I'm not making that up. Division vote, you just stand up. All in favor, stand up. All against, stand up. And they do actually count. They do count in a division vote, but they don't record the names. In neither a voice vote or a division vote do they count the names. Do they record the names, I should say. They actually count the vote in a division. They just kind of say which side wins in a voice. You're not on record. So remember, sometimes as a congressman, you want to be on record, right? You need to be on record. And sometimes you really don't want there to be a record. Division vote is a great way to not have it on record. The other way is the old roll call vote, which back in the day involved literally them calling everyone's name and them out loud giving their vote, and then us recording their votes. Well, since 1973, thanks to the beauty of STEM, they have basically a little clicker. They just push a button, yes, no, abstain. And it records your vote, your name, done, right? It has rapidly increased the speed at which a roll call vote occurs. It's why the number of roll call votes have increased since 1973. Now, to get a roll call vote, 1/5 of the House must request it. So 1/5 of the House members present, I should say, because again, we can only have we can have as few as 218 in the room and have the vote. but 1/5 of the quorum present must request a roll call vote to have one. In the Senate, it's simple. We either do a voice vote or a roll call vote. Again, a roll call vote, they will call your name, you stand, you give your vote. I actually watched the roll call vote for the impeachment. I had nothing better to do. And it was historic. I figured I'd go ahead and, well, I knew what it was going to be, but I was like, yeah, let's just see this just to say I saw it. And they did, Senator Sanders, Senator this, Senator Klobuchar, Senator, and they all stand up and they all say what they're going to say. And I mean, it was just guilty. Well, in that case, it was guilty or not guilty. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of, variety. And with all votes, it's either yay or nay, or aye or nay, or in favor, not in favor. They do not use a teller system, though. There's no stem in the Senate. The Senate is old school. You stand up and you say your vote. Okay, so that's how we vote. Now, remember how I said that, like, something can come out of the House and then it goes over to the Senate, and the Senate, they have things like riders? What if the Senate attaches riders to a bill? All right, so something comes out of the House, they vote on it in the House, it gets through the House, and then they kick it on over to the U.S. Senate. And when it's on the floor of the Senate, they add some riders, which makes it a different bill. It's not the same bill that was originally passed. It's not word for word what came out of the House. What happens then? Well, you got to have the same vote come out of both houses. You can't have two different versions of a bill. It's got to be the same bill, okay? So if either house makes a change, there are a couple ways that this can be done, okay? What first might happen, if they are very small, if they are very minor, okay? Basically, like, all right, the House starts it, they send it over to the Senate, and the Senate changes the wording of one sentence. The Senate could literally just send it back over to the House with a little note that says, we loved it, we just wanted to change the wording of this one sentence. You guys cool with that? And the House could vote right then and there whether they will accept it or not. Right, that's all you got to do. But what if it's major? What if it's really substantial changes? Now it's time for a conference committee. Oh, I told you we'd get back to that one. The conference committee is where we hash out, iron out, smooth out, create a compromise version acceptable to both houses of the United States Congress. Only a minority of bills actually go to conference. Because first of all, a lot of times when they're doing their work and they're talking to each other, okay? So a lot of times they try and avoid making major changes to bills, right? They don't want to have any more headache. So conference committees are not all that common, but they do occur. What happens is they are formed by members of both the House and the Senate, okay? Each House must first vote to form such a committee. So both houses have to agree. We need a conference committee to iron out the differences that we have in this bill, right? So both houses have to first agree to make a conference committee. Once they agree, then they begin naming members to the conference committee. The members are picked by the chairs of the standing committees that have been dealing with it. So whatever committee originated the bill over here or worked on the bill over here is going to name people. And I know I said that if it comes from the House to the Senate, they don't even bring it to committee. They still go talk to the members of that committee, and they're like, who should we put on the conference committee? Okay? There's no actual conference committee. A conference committee is made when one is needed. It's not a permanent or standing committee. Okay? Both sides are present. It's not just the majority party. Minority and majority parties are both on there. It's a pretty balanced blend, actually. And no decision can be made unless a majority of each House's delegation agrees. So they come up with a compromise, or at least, the House members are like, we love this compromise that we drew up, and these guys are like, yeah, no, we want to see even more changes. It can't move forward until both conference committees from both houses agree. Okay? Bargaining is long and difficult. In the past, it was secret, but the sessions are now. Some sessions are public, not all, but some. Overall, the Senate tends to do better than the House in conference committee. Just the Senate usually gets a little more of what they want than the House does, generally speaking. Okay. It gets done with the conference committee. The conference committee will then, when they're done, they will send a report back to their respective houses. The report can either be accepted or rejected. It can't be changed. It can't be amended. We either got to go with it or we don't go with it. And most of the time, it is accepted. Because the only other option is just to shoot it down and basically kill it. And we've come this far. I mean, we are literally at the last hurdle, right? We've crossed every other barrier. Come on, kids. All right, so let's say it gets passed. Let's say the conference committee's like, here it is, kids, and they're both like, all right, fine, go with it. All right, now it hits the president's desk. The president can either sign it or veto it, okay? If he signs it, it's a law. Congratulations. If he vetoes it, it has to go back to be approved or to be overrode. In order to do that, it goes back to the House where it started, okay? So if the bill originated in the House to start with, it goes back to the House, and they have to vote. And if a 2/3 vote occurs there, then it goes to the Senate, where you need another 2/3 vote to override a presidential veto. If you get 2/3 in the House but not in the Senate, it's dead, right? It doesn't matter. You have 100% in the House. If the Senate doesn't give you 2/3, you don't override the veto. The veto stands. Now, by the way, votes are roll call. When you're trying to overturn a veto, you have to go on record. There's no anonymity. And now, I realize this is a lot, and I realize this looks intimidating. I would recommend, if you're confused, just kind of gloss back over it. Look at the flow chart a little more. Like I said, it's not, when you really start to get into it, and you go over it a couple times, it makes a lot more sense. It looks bad at first. And this is actually a boiled down version, fortunately for us. Also, I put a link to a video by Schoolhouse Rock. Schoolhouse Rock is too old for my age. My brother is 10 years older. His generation had Schoolhouse Rock, which were basically music videos, educational music videos, cartoons. And there's one called I'm Just a Bill, and it kind of gives you a Cliff Notes version of this, basically in 3 minutes. Might want to watch it, just if for nothing else, the fact that it's good Americana. But anyhow, so there you'll have it. That is how a bill becomes a law. Now, let's talk about a couple more things really quickly before we wrap this up. In recent years, well, not just recently, in general, there's the whole, does Congress do a good job? Is Congress productive? Is Congress a waste? Is Congress, is it the swamp? Is it so partisan nothing gets done? All these, the usual questions about government. And the first thing I would say, if someone were to ask me that, and I'm sure some of you have noticed I do this a lot when you all ask me questions, how do you define productive? Are you looking at sheer volume? Are you looking at just the number of laws passed, the number of bills proposed versus the number of laws passed? I mean, how do you measure that, right? Because I don't know if sheer volume of legislation is a good measure. That could be a very wasteful government, if you think about it. So first thing we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean when we ask ourselves, is it legislatively productive? And that's the other thing. Major law versus minor law. Large sweeping legislation like Social Security, Medicare, things of that nature. How many small bills is that equal to, right? What's your ratio? Obamacare. Obamacare is equal to how many just little pithy laws you and I will never know about, right? I mean, you got to come up with a grading scale. Now, obviously, there are times when Congress has been crazy. The first 100 days, right? With FDR, the New Deal. In the mid-'60s, Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty. We had a ton of stuff produced, and some of it far-reaching and large. But most scholars agree that in recent decades, Congress has slowed. The 112th and 113th Congresses, the 112th ran from 2011 to 2013,
The 113th ran from 2013 to 2015, passed fewer bills than any Congress post-World War II. These were the least productive congressional years since the end of World War II. So if you want to look at just sheer volume, Congress has gotten slower. I do want to point out, too, very quickly, again, this is where not being in school is a bit of a downer. I always have a student who has my class and Mr. O'Connor's class, and I'm sure most of you are aware, if you've heard him speak, Mr. O'Connor is not from Northern Kentucky originally. He's English. And he is known to make comments mocking our government from time to time. And I usually have two bits of ammunition for my students to take down to his class and come back at him with, which most of my students eagerly do because they think they're like going to start a fight or something. Number one, I usually start off with, for our government to be such a horrible government, he has lived here an awful long time. If our Congress and our government are so abysmal, he could have left. No, it's a valid argument that he makes. Our government has a reputation for being horribly unproductive. But here's my real counter, right? Let's look at his beloved Parliament. There are studies that have shown that the difference in legislative productivity between Parliament and Congress is there, but is minimal. Our Parliament's a little more productive? Yes, they are. Think about the structure. It's a majority government. They better be more productive. I mean, you run the government. You're the majority party. You don't really have opposition. So I would expect them to be a little more productive. But here's the fun thing, if you think about it. And this is the one I've been able to use the last little bit. Brexit. There's a wonderful example of a parliamentary government encountering the very same problems that a congressional government would encounter. And so, studies have shown that for large, sweeping legislation, parliamentary government is no more successful than congressional government. So when you go to measure productivity, you have to keep in mind there's really nothing out there, democratically speaking, that is more productive, really, in the grand scheme of things. But back to, covering some of this matter. You have to remember, you have to, it's relative. I don't know why I struggled there. I expect when I look at the first 100 days, and those of you who had my American history class might remember that I always say this when I get to covering FDR, and the American history textbook mentions the first 100 days, right? And I say it's stupid that we have used that as a benchmark for every president since. Every president since. I've heard all the talking heads on Fox and CNN and everyone else. Oh, well, we'll see what he does in his first 100 days. We'll see, his first 100. Who cares? Are we in the midst of a Great Depression? Are we in the midst of, a major crisis? If a person takes over and the world's at peace and the economy is booming and everyone's happy, I don't expect the New Deal. And I don't expect a Congress galvanized to pass one. And so that's the other thing. We've got to keep in mind that one time period is not the same as the next. And so you can't have the same benchmark or the same standards always, right? Times change. Legislative needs change. Role of Congress changes. And we're going to talk more about it here in a moment. Earmarks. It's a great example of a tool that wasn't really used previously that's overused now, and it doesn't measure the same way. But I'm not going to say that it means Congress isn't doing their job, but we'll get there. I don't want to jump ahead. All right. Divided government versus unified government. We've talked about this before. The age-old, it's the other guy's fault, right? We would have gotten a whole lot more if it weren't for the damned Democrats. We would have gotten a whole lot more done if it weren't for those frigging, Republicans who aren't willing to compromise. If you look at it, there is no doubt that divided government does reduce the passage of legislation. But honestly, only on the biggest ticket items. If you look at it statistically speaking, only the largest and most controversial of matters suffer in their success rates under divided government. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of difference in unified versus divided government when it comes to average run-of-the-mill daily legislation. This again goes back to we're not a parliament, we're a Congress. Party is there, but it's not the end-all be-all. People vote across party. People cross the line all the time in their votes. And I've used it before in our class several times. The easiest example, 2016. Republican President, Republican Senate, Republican House of Representatives. Did I get a big, beautiful wall that Mexico paid for? No. Now, I know if we were in class, a hand would shoot up and there would be an argument that would ensue. Let me clarify. Yes, we had some wall construction, far reduced from the original proposal or promise, right? The Republicans in the House and the Senate watered down the original proposals. They had to, because it's government, okay? Trump and the Republicans did not just pass whatever bill construction, whatever wall construction bill they wanted. It was the usual give and take. Again, they had a majority over the Democrats in both houses of Congress, and they had the Oval Office. So that is a great real-world example from our own time period where unified government did the same thing divided government would have had. You had a compromise, watered down, a bunch of add-ons, a bunch of riders, etc. Again, big ticket items, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, war on poverty, things like that. That's when you need unified government, because the big ticket items are very controversial, and you really need kind of an unbreakable party unity to get those sort of things passed. The fourth issue, earmarks. Earmarks are specific exemptions from certain taxes or fees, or they are setting aside federal funding for certain projects. So earmarks are basically either the granting of certain tax exemptions or the granting of certain funds. All right? Earmarks, the use of these have tripled since 1994. In 2006 alone, there were nearly 13,000 earmarks passed by Congress or issued by Congress, totaling $64 billion. Earmarks, very few of them are in the bill's text. Most of them are hidden. They are hidden in the committee reports. They're there, but you're not going to find them. They're like hidden in tax code. They're there, but they're not directly attached. They're like a little footnote, right, on the bill. There's like a footnote, and there's a footnote to the footnote, and there's like a cross-reference, and there's a manual, and 17 documents later, you find it, right? Now, the reason I bring this up, it's still a form of legislative productivity. It's just not the old way. It's a different way of doing it, right? It's a way of, I'm gonna create a tax loophole without actually writing a law, right? I'm not going to create a new tax law. I'm just going to bury this in a bill, right? So earmarks are a form of legislative productivity. It is criticized. It's criticized by citizens. It's criticized by scholars. It's criticized by politicians. But guess what? They all use it. In 2008, John McCain and Barack Obama argued against earmarks. So apparently Republicans and Democrats don't like earmarks, yet earmarks remain. I mean, one of those two guys won in 2008. Earmarks did not go away. Earmarks, they're pork. They're the grease, right? They're the way that you do favors. It's the way that you give those interest groups what they want, so they'll support you. It's one of those dirty little secrets, right, of Congress and politics, and everyone's using it. Everyone benefits from it. Everyone stands up and goes, this is terrible, and then they turn around and they quietly use it. And so earmarks are too tempting to just do away with, right? Lastly, one last thing I want to talk about when it comes to productivity, and this kind of, I would say, ties into one period to the next. You know, ever since 9/11, if you say it has to do with security, it's going to pass. Doesn't matter who's in charge. Doesn't matter who started it. You know, post 9/11, security was everything. And it still, to some degree, is. You know, you make something about security or fighting terrorism, you've got a very good chance of it getting through. So that has been a way to, again, get things done. I'm not going to go back to that website and dig into it. But that bill to prevent firearms from being transferred to terrorists, no, I'm going to. I lied. I'm going to do it. I want to do it. Let's see. What was it? Prohibit the ooh, here we go. Right? Oh, they didn't do a whole lot to that one. Oh, wait. Amendment. Ooh, full bill text. I don't know. Okay, this one looks like they kept it pretty simple, I believe. That's impressive. That's impressive. That's probably the same thing. Let's see. Whoa. We don't want to subscribe to that. All right. Well, here you go. Vote 54 nay, 45 yay. Look at that. The Democrats all voted against it, and they all voted for the bill, denying firearms and explosives to danger. What is going on? The Republicans voted? Okay. So I guess the Republicans want firearms and explosives in the hands of terrorists. I don't know. This is, yeah. See, but again, I'm sure if you read all the bill's text, you'll find all the wonderful. That's why Dianne Feinstein, she wrote the bill. That's why the Republicans voted against it. You know, generally speaking, if something has to do with Homeland Security, it's getting passed in the post 9/11 world. Interestingly enough, and this is where I'll leave off. I just need a couple more minutes. The fourth plane, the one that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, outside of Shanksville, Pennsylvania. If you're aware of 9/11, two planes hit the World Trade Center's towers. One hit the Pentagon. There was a fourth one that went down in a field in Pennsylvania. They're aiming for the Capitol. I'm going to say 99.9% sure. You know, there's always the chance Al-Qaeda is trying to trick us. But they're aiming for the Capitol. And we came to realize post 9/11 that we had a massive weak spot, a blind spot. The greatest hole in our constitutional system, as a bipartisan committee stated. If you kill the House of Representatives, we have no way to replace them. The Constitution allows, the 17th Amendment to the Constitution allows for governors to appoint senators to vacated seats, provided that the state legislature has written that into the law. Not every state allows that. Many do, but not all. So there's a way to replace senators who die in office. There is no way to replace the House. There is, special election. There is. But there's no instantaneous way. If the House of Representatives were wiped out, you would not be able to have a House of Representatives back up and functioning anytime soon, which would bring everything to an absolute standstill, legislatively speaking, right? You have to have a House. It's the law. It's the rule. So that's an example of where, you know, we kind of realize, well, whoops, and we are still trying to come up with an answer. By the way, we're over a decade after 9/11, and we still have no constitutional amendment or legislation or anything that would solve that. That problem is still there. And so I think that's a great way to kind of end it, you know. A glaring hole in our governmental structure. We're fully aware of it, and we escaped it by what we believe was the bravery of some civilians who decided to fight the terrorists rather than just sit there in their seats and fly into the Capitol. We know that weakness is there, and we still have yet to fix it. Both sides are fully aware of it. It's difficult. It's tricky. It's a delicate game. It's a delicate balancing act, as you can see. So I hope this cleared some stuff up, or some of you might be more confused than when we started, and I apologize. If you have questions, please email me. We have one more video to go. I promise it'll be shorter. Basically, we're just going to look at attempts to clean up Congress, so to speak. not as much, nearly as much to cover than we did on this one. But if you have questions on this, please contact me. Be happy to try and help you out, clear it up, or if you want me to start another discussion page where you can ask questions out loud, so to speak. But otherwise, we will wrap up Chapter 9 here shortly. Thank you, gentlemen.